Good morning, good morning, good morning, Clover Creek Church. It is good to be in the house of the Lord. I appreciate the introduction, Harry, and children's choir was wonderful this morning. And thank you, Barb, and Ms. Keith, thank you for your part this morning. I appreciate the invitation to be able to be with you in worship. It's a beautiful drive this morning. I feel like we actually have a winter. Snow is staying on the ground for more than 4 or 5 days, and temperatures are below 20. So it's good to see some familiar faces. Some of you are familiar with what Harry was referring to, but I would like to bring you greetings from the community of Breezewood, from our Breezewood Trucker Traveler Ministry board of directors, from my family, my wife Roxanne, our 3 children who are not able to be here. But I thank you for your partnership. And I want to give a brief update and a little bit of history about the ministry. Then I want to share some more about this Corinthian passage and then show some of this PowerPoint, which some of the pictures you have seen. But the ministry in Breezewood has been going for about 35 years. It is a ministry of prayer, of presence, of counsel, hospitality, of emergency assistance for those who pass through Breezewood, the truck drivers, their families, travelers, and the employees as well. So it's, as the sermon title says, it's our endeavor is to be the business of Jesus in a sea of commerce. So we're thankful to be there in that community of Breezewood. It's a crossroads. The locals know to avoid it during those busy travel weekends on the summer or the holiday weekends. It's a traffic jam. But this is what puts Breezewood on the map. Folks coming off the highway by the thousands every day, and they stop in for a break, for fuel, for food, for a night's lodging. So that is the setting in which there is a Christian ministry. So I want to couch my comments about Corinthians by saying that here we are in our 21st century at a sea of commerce where those carrying the goods and services are in a truck. Well, flash back about 2,000 years to a town called Corinth in what is now modern-day Greece. And it was on an isthmus there. About 4 miles of land separated the Aegean Sea to waters that led into the Mediterranean. And this was a seaport busy on both sides of that isthmus. So it was a cosmopolitan town of commerce, and if you'll excuse the expression, I think it was a sailor's town because the goods came in on a ship. And sometimes they were transported across that bridge of land. There is a canal there now, built in 1869. But that is the history of Corinth. So how did Paul and his compatriots ended up in Corinth? They had been called, the Macedonian call that we read about. He was in Asia Minor, and he had a vision. And in this vision, there was a man from Macedonia that beckoned them, come and help us. And Macedonia is what is modern-day Greece. So very, very shortly after that call, they ventured across the Aegean and to Philippi, Neapolis, and then Philippi and Thessalonica. And so churches were planted. These are the first churches in Europe. And after some unfruitful, what they thought was unfruitful time in Thessalonica and Berea and some different places, he went south to Athens, and he was laughed out of Athens because the culture, the Greek culture of that time, the intelligentsia and the philosophers, they couldn't stomach words and a story about a dead man rising. So in a way, they were laughed out of Athens, and from there went on to Corinth. And Corinth was this commercial hub, and it was full of pagan temples and idols. I want to share a couple of these with you. History is fascinating in that area. So in this sea of commerce and sea of what I call paganism, there were the Greek and Roman gods like Aphrodite, the goddess of love, and Ares, the war god, or Melicertes, patron of seafarers, and Poseidon, the god of the sea. Well, that makes sense, being a harbor town. Poseidon, interestingly, Poseidon was especially honored at the Isthmian Games, which Corinth hosted every 2 years. Now, let me call our attention to those games. There was a nearby town called Olympia, and they also had some games, from which we have the modern Olympics, which are coming up shortly for the world. So Paul visits this town of Corinth, and he didn't think the start of an early church would get much of a better reception than what he got in Athens, but it did, and it took root. He was there about a year and a half, and an early church was founded. He then moved on, as these missionaries did. He ended up in Ephesus on journey number 3, and he got word from the church that he founded in Corinth that they were having some issues. And so Paul writes these letters, these epistles, to address some of these issues in the early church at Corinth. So he was writing these letters while on assignment in Ephesus, and I just want to review a couple of things that Paul was addressing. One was what I might call a pastoral cult, and the folks in the early church weren't sure who they should be following. Well, some said they followed Paul, some said they followed Apollos, some said they followed Cephas, which is Peter. So they were a little uncertain as to Jesus being the center of who they are to follow. Then there was another issue, communion. The Lord's Supper had become a lively potluck, and those who were wealthy and brought a little food with them left fully filled up, and those who were poor left the church hungry still. So Paul was addressing they weren't quite treating the Eucharist, the communion, properly. And then the third one of the believers in this, he's speaking to the believers in the church. One of the believers in the church was sleeping with his father's wife, even by pagan standards. That was a no-no. So he was addressing that issue. These are all the things he was addressing. And then the fourth thing, believers were dragging each other into secular court and allowing non-believers to decide issues. And Paul's saying, why are you doing that? So again, just a little backdrop of what I find fascinating, the formation of these early churches and how here we are 2,000 years later, and we continue to meet in places like Martinsburg, PA, and we're standing on the backs of these heroes of the faith who moved this early movement, these followers of Jesus, from the Middle East to Asia Minor to Europe and eventually to the Americas. And we are thankful for all the work that they have done. So the early church at Corinth, they had their issues. The church through every age, everywhere, has their issues. Each of you, myself, we have our issues in life, in our communities, in our personal lives, in our families, at our school, at work, at the church. So I want to segue into 21st century Breezewood, Pennsylvania, a traveler's town. Those who come into Breezewood have their own issues. Some travelers that we encounter are in situations of homelessness or have some difficulties in their lives, loss of employment, loss of relationships. Truck drivers that I encounter, some of them have been on the road, are regularly on the road 2 weeks, 2 months, sometimes more at a time, away from their home community, away from their families, away from children, and missing some milestones. So It's a difficult job in that respect. And just show of hand, how many of you have family members that in some way, shape, or form are involved in the trucking industry? We have a number of you. So many of you understand the life of a driver, OTR, over-the-road driver, and the amount of time that they're away from home. So, in steps a church from Martinsburg about 15, 20 years ago. I still remember this encounter. They gave me a phone call and said, hey, our men's group has an idea. And so there was a group of you, maybe some of you were on that initial meeting, came down to Breezewood and began to talk about an outreach. And that outreach developed into what we call Valentine's Card Table Outreach. And it has happened almost every year since that time. We had a 1 year, I think, because of COVID. Was that 2 years ago? Maybe last year. We were not able to do it. So here's, in the middle of a sea of commerce, in a travel plaza in Breezewood, a table full of Valentine's cards, some smiling faces, some fellowship behind that table, and there's stamps, and this is all for free. And truck drivers, travelers, even employees come up to this table, and their eyes are wide and say, how can this be? Where's the catch? This is not for free. You don't get anything for free. What a wonderful moment, invitation to share the gospel. It's like God's love. It is free. All we have to do is accept it. So it's a blessing. Where's the catch? Well, the catch is there isn't a catch. It's just God offering his hand and in Christ's love, and we can accept it. So I would like to share, a picture tells 1,000 words. So let me advance our pictures. I guess I'm at the beginning. Let's go back to the beginning. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. Got to press the right button. Okay. Just briefly, prayer, presence, counsel, hospitality, emergency assistance. Now, I thank whoever your secretarial staff is. Thank you for printing that out. In your bulletin, you will see this very form, and you will notice 2020 and 2021, there was a reduction of in-person contacts because of COVID. But that doesn't mean we weren't as busy. Electronic means of communication ramped up tremendously, and we were able to connect in that way, communicate with many of our folks off the highway in that way. Bible studies have resumed after COVID. We meet Wednesday mornings at the Gateway. Seminary students for years from Wesley Seminary in Washington, D.C., we've been able to host them for 10 days, 2 weeks. Very rich experiences. That's myself and driver Bob with Smith Transport. Here is a gentleman who is a physical education teacher from Denmark, and he decided to run across America with this little get-up. And I was just amazed to hear his story, and some days he ran 50 miles. Incredible. Valentine's Table. Thank you, Harry, for introducing me, and I see Jim there, and thank you for your presence. There's other pictures here. Here's what the table looks like, sponsored by Clover Creek. You see the cards there. Folks can just step up to the table, take a look at which one looks appropriate. And this is a very practical way to encourage the drivers to nurture their loved ones back home, to remember their wife or their mom or their sister, their daughter, whatever, just to let them know, thinking of them while on the road. There's another picture of the Valentine's table. There's a driver that has picked up one, and he's happy and pleased. Another driver there sorting through. Here's one who's writing his note to his special one. And now I'm moving on to other hospitality tables. About 7 times a year, different church groups have sponsored a hospitality table during the busy holiday times, travel times. This is Holsinger Church. They've done it for years, their youth group, and they hand out not just food items, but these are faith-related items, many of these for children. If any of you go to Camp Blue Diamond, you know what good work Holsinger does during Heritage Fair. So that's part of what they do. Here's a youth group from an Ebenezer church in Fulton County touring a truck. Claysburg Church of the Brethren hospitality table. And there's some visitors to our table. Love that picture. Yeah, Snake Spring Church of the Brethren hospitality table. And there's the back lot at the Gateway TA. Driver Michael, who felt he had a experience in his life being caught into drugs and alcohol, got himself clean, turned his life over to the Lord many, many years ago, felt called to start a ministry as a truck driver, and it was called TRACK, T-R-A-C-K, Truckers Readily Advancing Christ's Kingdom. And he was able to speak with truck drivers on a very regular basis, and continues to, actually. I continue to communicate with him via text messaging. And here's a driver, actually lives in the Huntington area. His name's Sean, and he tries to keep himself in shape. This is in the back lot at the Gateway, and he hauls out his portable workout equipment, and there he goes. And here's a traveler who, if you'll look in his windshield, he has a little stuffed animal that is his rat navigator. He gets a kick out of his little sidekick. There's a closer picture of his rat navigator. But lots of good conversations with Richard, driver from Wisconsin. Since COVID came along, we have done many of our auctions online, Facebook auctions. So this is, and a takeout banquet. So this is the past year. I think there were about 5 online sales, and then the banquet on October 23rd. We give thanks to the Everett Church of the Brethren. Bev Swindell, part of the Everett Church. Here's one of the bazaars. This is pre-COVID because it's in person. And here's Dennis Schultze, who had a horrible, horrible truck accident in 2012 outside of Chicago. As the paramedics struggled to get him out of his truck, they could not do it. They could not extricate him, so they had to cut his leg off to save his life. And so this gentleman was in recovery for many, many, many years, and this is his maiden journey back on the truck with his prosthesis, and he's able to drive again. And you can look him up online. He started a handshake journey. He's been invited to speak. I mean, he took his wheelchair and did hundreds of miles to call attention to veterans. Just a incredible, incredible story. This particular human chain rescue happened outside of Everett, probably about 4 miles from my house. On the turnpike, this truck went down over the embankment. The guy was trapped, and someone captured this on cell phone. This is a human chain to pull this gentleman out of his cab. It was the bad storm of, 2018 or 19, I guess. And here's the driver in the middle, surviving that. He was from Idaho. What a story. And here's, just real briefly, years ago, there was a young couple traveling with dogs. They had all the get-up, hopping trains, sleeping out under the stars, and they were on their way. They had been on the road for 9 months, and they were on their way back to north of New York City where his family lived. He had not been in touch with his family. He was 19 years old. Had not been in touch with his family for all that time. Finally, in Breezewood, they had come to the end of their rope, and he made a phone call to his father. And his father was overjoyed to hear from his son. And this is the son's girlfriend that they met on the road. And so the father who owned a private plane, arranged to fly in to Carlisle Municipal Airport, and I drove these two to meet the Father. And I will never forget the embrace of the Father when he met his son in this homecoming after all these months. And I later learned the reason this young man took to the road, dropped out of high school, was because he had lost his older brother to a tragic motorcycle accident about a year and a half prior. And this was his way of dealing with the grief. But I just think of the tale of the prodigal son and the love of the father with open arms as the son returns. Incredible story. Holsinger Youth, doing a tour of the Gateway TA. Oh, I'm pressing the wrong one. More ways to be involved, ministry events, shopping online. Yeah, we're in a new world, shopping online. Participating in fundraisers. There's pumpkin rolls we make every year for the past 4 or 5 years. Ham and sandwich pie sale, which we've put off a little bit because of COVID. And we do the pies as part of the sandwich sale. There's Dave Flummerfelt, who is a part of our committee. He's also very active in Heritage Fair and is chaplain at Prince Gallitzin State Park. Got to see him in action this summer while we were camping. More ways to be involved. I covet your prayers. I invite your prayers for those we encounter, the hospitality workers, prayers for the travelers that we encounter, some of them in difficult situations, situations of homelessness or running from issues of life or just processing grief. Prayers for the truckers. I kind of chuckle when I look at the name of the company of this gentleman in the lower right. I think it says 6 girls, 1 boy trucking. He must have many daughters and I assume 1 wife. I'm hoping that anyway. More ways to be involved. Pray for those who receive pastoral care. And then pray for me, please. And thank you. But I appreciate the opportunity to share a few stories and a few pictures. And I give thanks to God for your faithfulness, not just for this mission in Breezewood, but for all of the ways that this church, you as the congregation, reaches out in the community and the broader community. Never a dull moment carrying the message of Christ to a world, to all of us who need it. So I pray God's blessing on your continued journey of faith at this place in Martinsburg. In Jesus' name, amen.